Okay, let's see. Have I gone live? I think so. I think so. Well, welcome. Happy Tuesday as I'm recording this. January 7th, 2025, 2:13 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I got a couple things to cover. No, three. I don't know why. Couple, right? Couples, two, trio, three things to talk about. And of course, if folks show up here in the chat, I'm happy to talk about other things. But the primary things, the raison d'etre, if you will, of this stream is to go through, first of all, Hexcrawl25 challenge, which you'll see over here, and then a couple things that I have made, one of which will go very much in hand if you're doing Hexcrawl25, and then another one where I'm trying something slightly new, but not really. But we'll get there. We'll get there. So first of all, the Hexcrawl25 challenge, I know I forgot to link this in the show notes because I kind of jumped on here and just hit the go buttons before I'm always hasty with hitting the go buttons. So I will add this to the show notes and link it all up. Over at the website is Matlock with an extra A, matlockstavern.com/Hexcrawl25. Hey Ian, hey Brian. Posting Matlock, again, 2 A's, posted this Hexcrawl challenge, and I'll just read through it because it's pretty darn short. It's mostly graphical, as you'll see. The overview is that they were inspired by Sean McCoy's Dungeon 23. If you remember Dungeon 23, I did a tool for Dungeon 23, and there was also Hex 23, and I think there ended up being a bunch of 23 challenges. To create Hexcrawl25, a year-long project to build a fully connected campaign setting. The goal, design 19 interconnected regional hexes divided into 319 sub-hexes and fill them with creative content, whether through art, world building, or both. You don't need to draw your own maps. Use existing resources like dice and logos if you prefer. The focus is progress, creativity, and finishing. Hey, Matt, welcome from the UK. Hey, here's Harvey Tristan. Okay. The focus is progress, creativity, and finishing. Even if you don't complete the challenge, it's a large challenge after all. Be proud of anything you manage to create. Hopefully this inspires a few people to take a break from the stress of the real world for a bit and just make something cool in a parenthetically much more manageable and parentheticals made-up world. If you'd like to share what you create, though you are under no obligation to do so, this project is first and foremost for you. Consider sharing on Blue Sky or that other site under the hashtag Hexcrawl25. You can also find them on Blue Sky, and they have a link to that. And then they have some kind of cool pictures here. They basically created, let me see if I can zoom out here to get the whole thing on the screen. Oh, it's actually one big image. So I guess it doesn't make sense to get the whole thing on the screen. Or it pretty much takes you through the whole thing. It's a very nice. It reminds me of things I would find on Pinterest when I used to. I'm sure Pinterest is still around. But I used to kind of be more active going through Pinterest, and I'd find these great pictorial tutorials with just images or tutorials in kind of image form. And this reminds me a lot of that. Hexcrawl25 challenge. You get this campaign hex map with kind of flower at a regional level, and then inside a smaller level, and then you end up with something like this. And then he's got essentially a month with some kind of breakdown. You know I'm up for a challenge. I like these challenges. I did a Hexcrawl or a Hex 23 helper, and I did a Lore 24 helper. So this one I've done, but this is not quite a helper. So I'm doing things a little bit differently this time, which is I put together something I'm calling the Joy of Hex Maps, which here's the itch page for it, just to get an idea. So the other helpers I just dropped off for free. This one's going to be free for this month. I am going to end up charging for it because I'm putting a lot of work into it and effort. But to kind of help folks jumpstart, it's free. And then after January, if it seems something useful to you, then you can plunk down. I will continue doing what I've been doing lately, which is folks who pay for copies unlock community copies. That way there's always a chance you could pop over and see that there are some community copies. Community copies is just basically a freebie for someone who needs it, who can't pay, won't pay, whatever. I prefer you save the community copies for the folks who can't pay, but I get it. Let me go into the document itself, of course. I've got it Oops, that's what we're doing next. We'll start up here. Oh, of course. What am I doing? Back here. Hit home. There we go. All right. This cover image that I created is completely unique to me and bears no what is it? No association, no resemblance to anything that has been created before. So this document's now 22 pages long. It started, I think, when I first uploaded it, and that was only a couple days ago. It was it 15 or 18? Hold on a minute. How big? Because I won't do this forever. It was 14 pages, so it's gone up. First for 14, then it was 20. Now it's 22. Now some of the stuff, if you almost put pages, and of course I'm not doing a whole lot. Hey, Beardy Man. Some of it's kind of spacing, but so I've got 2 templates here. I haven't numbered them. I just realized I should put the numbers in like they've got it. Now I'm doing something a little bit differently. You could tell. You can't tell from my regional map template. It's pretty much the same as what they have. For the local one, I'm doing the 3-mile hexes, so let me back up. The regions in the Hexcrawl25 are 24. These larger, I'm calling them region, or I guess I should call it regional. These are regional hexes. These are all 24 miles each, inside each. And that's fine. I don't have a preference really for those regional ones, but I've really been digging for these local kind of individual hexes. I guess would be the most granular level of hex, pretty much. Yeah, you could probably do another level if you wanted to, but I like the 3-mile hex. But I wanted to basically, I'm sort of breaking, I guess it's just is my want. I'm already kind of breaking compatibility somewhat, but I didn't want to do it at the big level. So we're keeping the 24-mile hexes, and 3-mile hexes go into 24 miles. So but what ends up happening is you end up with more hexes inside here. So I think there ends up being 72 hexes instead of whatever. I think I counted them all. There's probably some way to math it out, but I think I actually counted them, and I think it's 72 hexes per one of these. So it's a bit more, obviously, because the 6-mile hexes versus the 3-mile hex. Kind of it is what it is. But I think you can work with it. And I'm gonna be part of what's been interesting with this is it's caused me to have to go and kind of write out and think about and sort of get in a procedural way stuff that I kind of do. I've talked about in different ways, whatever, but kind of put it all out there in a way that I hope is organized. So this document, like I mentioned on the itch page, is going to be kind of growing. At some point, I'll end up with like, okay, I think I'm kind of finished with it for the medium to long term. But things are going to keep popping up that I'm going to want to add, so on and so forth. Frederick asks, how many days of horseback travel to cross the 24-mile hex? Well, I mean, that would be very much depend, at least the way I would run it. There's all terrain in here. So you could generalize it because I don't want to get in the steps yet, but unknown, I would say, in terms of how many days of horseback. It's going to depend on the terrain. Any case, so we got our regional, the larger hexes, then inside each one of these smaller hexes, I will add the ABC on this, and I'll do something. I'll add the 1, 2, 3, whatever on here. So we'll so I'll get that because I realize I don't have that. I'll do that. I have this kind of standard boilerplate I'm doing on stuff. This is just my way. This is what's his name? Aleister Crowley, though it might have been a theosophical thing. His "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," which is basically just my way of saying, in maybe a little bit obscure way of like, do with this what you want, right? You're taking this, if you want to turn it upside down, inside out, do it, right? It's yours. That's the only rule. And I've kind of been putting I think I've settled on this version of this. There's a couple different ways to say this particular line. That's the one that I've been using. I got some intro stuff, right? I thought it might be good because I don't know, maybe people will be hitting this challenge that don't really know what a hexcrawl is. Or sorry, hexcrawl or hex map. I'm more in the hex map side of it for this, obviously. But so I got to, what is a hex map kind of thing? How big is a hex? I just realized, so I just had to upload the files. This, for whatever reason, I don't know if this is an issue with affinity, but I noticed that it turned into gobbledygook. And nobody had called me out on it, the fact that it turned to gobbledygook. Maybe no one had really noticed it, but I noticed it this morning, or actually about 15 minutes ago, so I updated that. Let's see, Frederick asks, oops. How far is a league? I'm just going with league. I like the league as kind of 3 miles. 3 miles. 3 miles. 3 miles. Did I say league? I think I put in parens the league. So 3 miles, one league. There you go. I like leagues. I like these some of these historical. It's a little bit fuzzier. I like the fuzziness of it because you can pretty much because hexes they're all approximations anyway, not supposed to be exacting. So if a party would happen to have your hex map, or and say, well, how far away is this? You can say, yeah, it's about this many leagues. How many leagues is that? Well, a league is approximately 3 miles, but whatever, it's not fixed. And so I kind of like that. It gives this sort of it's a measure that will be fine enough. The party could say, okay, well, heck, leagues are about this much. We can kind of figure it out, but then you're not on the hook for some super specific GPS like thing, but you could still give a number. And of course, you could use things like, this much, half a day's ride or this much a walk also. But I like leagues. Oh, Beardy Ben says it should be Crowley. Okay, yes, Crowley. Yeah, that's when you only read things, you end up with your own pronunciations. I'll accept Crowley. Appreciate it. It's always good to learn the right way. So we'll get through a little bit of that, and then just saying like, hey, this is not going to be all about world building. This is about building the map, and then creating a hex map. So this is where, well, I mean, the challenge doesn't give any structure as to how to create your hex map. I think it says, draw this much, kind of do that much. I'm going a little bit more, and I'm going with really a hex map, like using the symbols. I like, just to go back to there so quickly, I really like their, where is it? Like this stuff here is really nice, but I think that's more, one of the problems with this style, I think, is you can get really caught up on the beauty of it all, or lack thereof. If you look at something, it's like, it's not pretty, or that doesn't look the way I want to. And you could get in that with the hex symbols too. Goodness knows I've gone down tons of rabbit holes in terms of hex symbology, but I feel like you can go with a really quick and dirty hex symbols and just go. So my focus with the guide is using hex symbols and not on this kind of more pictorial drawing it out, as we will see. So this is where we're getting into the kind of structure part of it, right? So first you're going to map your regions. Just do all the regions, all your main regions all at once, and don't worry if you get some incongruous results. The idea is here is you can solve for things as you drill down. So I just have a quick one, basically, is it grasslands, woodlands, wetlands, barrens, mountains, or desert? I don't have, sea or coast, but you could probably put sea or coast on the wetlands. I figure at some point, if you have an idea, like it's going to be an island or it's going to be on the coast, then you will insert that yourself and kind of just make that call of, yes, this is a lake, or this is a Great Lake, or this is an inland sea, or whatever, right? I think I could put everything and make some ginormous table. I've really been digging these D6 tables because they've kind of forced you to be kind of focused. They don't give you too many options. That kind of option analysis paralysis type thing. And I think it just works well. But obviously, if you have an idea, go with your idea. But this is if you don't, or if you need one to start. So we're gonna roll. You're gonna roll for, and I have an example map which will be in here in a second. You're gonna roll for all your regional terrain types. Frederick asked about for the fantasy trip. I have the fantasy trip book, whatever it's called, whatever the core book, but I have to read it. I have not read it. So I don't know about 3 mile hexes, but I think for a spell, I would start with 3 mile hexes. 24 mile hexes for a spell. Maybe at a certain levels you could kick that off, but I'd have to read the fantasy trip because I have very, very limited recollections of how that all works. Okay, so these 24 mile hexes, you're just going to roll for your terrain. And then I had this idea of making expanses, which is when you're grouping regions together, right? So what I'm trying to do, so part of what I'm trying to do, and I do this a couple of times, is I want you to group things together. And then you're grouping things together, you can define things for those groups that apply to everything beneath it. So for example, when you talk about Appalachia, that's a whole region. And so great. And I use Expanse because they use region. I kind of copy the Hexcrawl25 nomenclature, so I can't use region for this. I'm using Expanse. The idea is, okay, so now you know that stuff about Appalachia. You can write some stuff about this Appalachia region that applies to all the hexes beneath it. Therefore, you don't have to write that for each individual hex. Now you can concentrate on if there's something unique in that hex. So you can do that for just these overall regions. Great, this is Appalachia, or I think like the Badlands in North Dakota, the Finger Lakes in New York State, the Grand Canyon. I probably could and should, excuse me, come up with some more international, non-American examples, but I think you get the idea. So you have that level where we're trying to do some grouping. This is all kind of help spread the load or mitigate the amount of hexes to actually key up once you get down to all the individual hexes. So that's step 2. Hey, identify some regions. And then step 3, for each of those hexes, decide whether it's a wild hex or a settled hex. I don't know if this will make sense to you, but it makes sense to me, and that's why I've done it, and we'll see kind of down the line that when you're determining the contents of a particular hex, settled is basically where there are settlements, organized settlements. Wild is the wilderness. You can't have settlements in the wilderness, and you're going to have different things in the settlements, but we can sort of shade the odds a little bit, so you get more of a concept of here's where the organized cultures are. Here's where the kingdoms and the dukedoms are, and these other spots maybe have stuff, but they're more isolated. They're going to be more wild, and these are going to be more. So you could just kind of play around with different aspects just by deciding whether this one's going to be more, it's been occupied by organized cultures more, or it's been kind of left to its own devices. And so here's the sample I did. And you can do this. The nice thing about these methods, I think I pretty much just used this, is and rolled dice. This just took a couple minutes. So in a couple minutes, we've already got our main thing. So I rolled up a ton of badlands and deserts and mountains with a couple of forests in there, 1 wetlands. So that's what I got. Excuse me, the stuff that's shaded gray ended up being wilderness, and the stuff that's white ended up being settled. And like the dice do sometimes, I got these kind of interesting things. I got a kind of pocket of settlement over here. And the funny thing is, as you get in here, it might not be all that settled, but we'll see, because it is barrens, which means it's probably not going to be brimming with settlements. But you get these kind of patterns. And that's kind of the other thing, which I get into a little bit down the line, is use the patterns to your advantage. When you see patterns like making these expanses, look at these expanses. So here I think in my example, I look at I got these barrens, mountains areas. That's probably, and maybe even the desert, right? That's probably like some kind of region of all, crunchy, craggly landscape. Maybe this is a high, colder desert that's up among these peaks kind of thing. This swamp may be in a valley or something. Maybe there's water that comes down in here, coming in here, right? And then this is up high again, so maybe there's cliffs or something or mountains. Because remember, this is just the overall. It's not all the terrain; it's the overall terrain. So there could easily be a barrier of some sort that keeps the desert out of the wetlands, right? But we can kind of see these things happening just from the dice. Then what you're going to do, or at least what I am recommending doing, is you're going to go through your regions and roll up all the terrain locally. Now, if you're doing the challenge and whoops, where's my thing? I suppose I should do it here. If you're going to do this whole thing, then you can just go through and do everything. But you could also easily start a whole bunch of adventures just in one hex. So if you wanted to pick, your center hex and then roll that one out and go through to play it, that's great. That's probably what I'd recommend if you're not doing something like the challenge, or you're not trying to make a whole setting, because it's overkill. Like as a challenge for a year, it's great. But if you just want to get down and play, just make a couple of, make 1 region hex, or even you could do a lot less than a region hex, and you'll be good to go. And apologies for my voice crackling. And here's some warm tea for the working man. So that's the concept. So anyway, so we go through. And you roll for the type of terrain. So first you check what's your main terrain, right? So if you're in the Barrens, if you rolled up, which I do in my example, you're in this Barrens hex, then you go down to this Barrens table and you roll for what's on the Barrens. And then you roll their shapes, which you've seen me use before. I think I called it Hexed, but you roll the shapes. And then you, this way, this what this allows you to do is generate one of these fast. I think I did this, and really if I was doing this printed out on a piece of paper, I mean, I don't know, 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more. I think I'm part of it. What I'm doing it here is I'm monkeying with copy pasting these. I just hand drew these quickly, kind of icons, but you could probably do this more efficiently. Of course, you could take more time. You know, it's something you do for fun, so you don't have to rip through it as quickly as possible. But I think the point is this doesn't, you can get to this level, which seems like a lot, but we did it very quickly. And you've seen me do stuff on, if you've seen some of the streams in the past where I've gone through this, you can go through this pretty quickly. So I have the shapes, you roll, and if you get wetlands, there's an extra roll so you can decide what kind of wetlands it is. These are all river shapes. These are swamps or lakes. This could be a river and this is swamp or lake. So you get that. And so here's my example where I got some rivers, and I like to fill in underneath the terrain, and I kind of just vary the river around a little bit just for fun. And I got, you know, lake region over here, and I just, you know, you connect the dots, right? Just try to put them in, and these were all sort of shapes, and I just kind of cleaned up the shapes a little bit. And of course, these things are supposed to be helpers. You don't have to go by this all the way. And what I did was once I got to a point where I didn't have a lot of spaces to fill, and I thought like I had context for what I was doing, then I just filled it in with what made sense. These are tools meant to help you. You're not chained to the tool. Use the tool as far as it takes you to a place you want to go, and where you're like, hey, no, the tool doesn't make sense, or it's not giving me what I want, whatever, then, you know, you ditch the tool and put it in, right? They're meant to be helpers. They're not meant to chain you in any particular process. Brian says, the issue I tend to have doing hex-related things is the feeling that every step I take is like exponentially creating more work, things that need definition. Well, I think part of, and Brian, I'm not sure, maybe this will help you. Maybe this would help you in some way, but this grouping that I've been talking about, right? So what you would do is, and I have an example, I don't use this one, but you see I have this big mountain range that cuts through here, and you got little outliers here. So, you know, what do you do with these mountain ranges? And of course, if I had more map, I could zoom out to see if this is part of an even bigger mountain range, or however, or eventually I might have a huge map, maybe in Worldographer, which is probably where I would do this if I was doing it digitally, but, you know, I'm trying to put this in a book. So I'm putting this out, but, you know, you look at this and you can identify that, okay, here is this mountain region. You could even include these barrens as kind of part of this overall mountain region. And you can think about, well, what is that region? What is it called? What does it have in common? And then you've written all that out. Once you've written that part out, you've covered a whole bunch of hexes. And that's not to say that now you can leave all these hexes blank, but then you only have to think about, is there a unique thing in a particular hex, and what is that thing? So the idea here is a kind of a top-down approach of saying, okay, what are the most common areas? So you have common on the regional level, like zooming out that further step, right? If we're back here, what is the common on this level? Okay, we're calling this mountains and this Badlands region Appalachia, right? This kind of thing here, or whatever. We're calling it something. And now we're zooming into this hex, this top hex here, and now we've zoomed in here, and so then we can call this like the northern reach, or whatever you want to call it, that kind of part of it. Just like I'm sure if I were to zoom in, you know, you see Appalachia, which, I don't know, goes across like 1 or 2, 3 U.S. states, maybe, depending on how you define it and everything. I'm not even sure what the boundaries of it are. And then if you zoomed in particular states, in particular counties, you'd see different things. So that's kind of what you're doing. So you can identify things at different levels. So we have like here all of Appalachia, great, and I can make a list of things. These are all the Appalachia kind of stuff, and that applies to everything. Whatever. Then I can zoom into this level. I'm like, okay, here we're in this hex, we're this part of it. What does this part have? And I can apply that to all those mountains, maybe even these Badlands and mountains if I decide they're all the same. Or they could be two different things. Here are the peaks. That's one thing. These Badland areas, that's something else. Great. And now I can write some things about that stuff. Then I'm reducing the work, right? We have all these commonalities, but we can still have unique things where they pop up. But I hear you that it feels like there's a lot of work. But, you know, I think to me it's kind of front loading the work, but you can also don't have to front load it too. You can wait. If you're not starting a party in this hex, if this is, you've already created a hex, let's say your hex is down here, which I guess you can't see because if your hex is this next hex here, leave this stuff as kind of blank, right? If you're creating it for the challenge, you're going to go through everything, but otherwise, just only make what you kind of need and around it, and then move on. Hey, Matt, appreciate the kind words. So now we're moving on. Okay, so now we're doing landmarks. Like the landmarks, the kind of one thing I'm not getting into. I know and I've dallied with them before. The sort of you have a thing, a thing, and a thing, a big thing, a small thing, and a hidden thing, and those are great. I think they're great. I think if you're getting into the more detailing part, I mean, awesome. But I think there is some simplicity, and I think I've mentioned this in a couple of videos recently. Of hey, you know what? Isle of Dread, some of these classic things, just one thing a hex. Wolves Upon the Coast, people like, just one thing in a hex. Start with the one thing. You can come back and add more stuff. You can come back and layer it in there. If your party is spending a lot of time in a hex, add more stuff. Obviously, if you look at something like Keep on the Borderlands, the whole thing is in one hex. And you can think about, well, what would that hex be labeled on? Would it be labeled with a settlement because the keep's there? Would it be labeled with a cave icon because there's the dungeons there? I would probably, I don't know if I posted anywhere, but I actually made a picture where I did kind of 3 different renderings of the Keep on the Borderlands, whether it's into 1 hex, 2 hexes, or 3 hexes. I actually kind of like 3 hexes for that, so each thing can kind of be separate, but just kind of keep it simple. Keep it simple. Get your one thing in there, and if you find yourself with time to kill and you want to do more, then do more. But just do 3. And here I've broken down your landmarks into 3 different kinds of landmarks. One is a settlement, right? Some kind of occupied location by something organized. So it's not a lair. I wouldn't even say it's a bandit camp. Though you could make a bandit camp a settlement, I would probably put that as a site maybe, or even a hazard. I don't know. There's some gray areas where you can figure out whatever. You could obviously make it a settlement and be fine. Hazard, some kind of natural feature, the cliffs, the quicksands, the whatever. There's a crater here. There's a chasm. There's something of that nature. And then a site would be your caves, ruins, your adventure locations, basically. And you could find some areas where they might overlap a little bit. You can think about, well, maybe there's a site inside a hazard. Sure, you can do all that stuff, right? This is just meant to give a basic, let's just get broad stroke stuff down here. It's not meant to tie you down. Again, it's just meant to kind of give you some direction and then shove you off in that direction a little bit. You can obviously change it up, do whatever. And then depending on I set up for both settled and wild, and then each of the terrain types, including hills now. There's different hills terrain. I don't have hills as their own terrain, but different terrains have hilly types. So hills show up, and then you get basically whether there's nothing, whether there's a hazard, a site, or settlement. And so I have one for settled. Oh, and I do have you kind of roll with advantage, so to speak, if you're next to water, because I want to emphasize, or I think that most settlements are going to be near to water. So where there's water, if there's going to be settlements at all, they're probably near water. At some point they need to be somewhat near water, so that's what I do. And then the numbers are slightly different when you get into the wild regions. And then you're done. And then, well, not done, but then I talk about settlements and then sites. If you want to roll for settlements, you can, but basically I try to do that thing, which I need to update. I just realized I didn't do the thing that I talk about. So in the settlements, I talk about, which I've done on a couple streams, I talk about the concept of looking at settlements and upgrading them depending on how many settlements are near. It's kind of like turning what do you call it? Houses into hotels in Monopoly, right? You need to fill in the houses, then you can upgrade the hotels. In this case, to get a town, you need to have, I think, what do I have here? 3 contiguous village hexes, then you get a town. If you get 6 or more, you can have a city. If you decide that they're not all of one, then maybe you can play a little differently. And then I have for sites, if you want to roll for the type of site, I think here I have caves, burial mounds, ruined towers, ruined castles, ruined temples, or a mysterious portal. And, cave could be inside a crag in the earth or a pit, right? Anything kind of like that. And then I don't have much of the determining hazards. but here's the map that I made. I basically rolled through everything. So this is a settled hex. I literally just rolled through. And so I got, there's a bunch of locations on here, but I think, again, like speaking to what I was saying for Brian and just generally, you're going to want to group these together. So I have an example I mentioned later where I look at, okay, I have these 3 grass hexes that all have a hazard on here. So I'm not going to write, I could, if I wanted to, if I had the inspiration, I could write a different hazard for each one of these, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, and as we get down to keying your hexes, so if you have these areas that are blank and you want to roll to see if there's anything in it, you can roll for location of enter creature. What I think, what I see, what I would, let's see, how am I trying to put this? What am I trying to say? My idealized way of looking at this would be you're grouping all these things together. So I'm taking these, here's my example. I'm taking these 3 lighter hexes here, and I've decided that there isn't 3 separate hazards in here. It's one hazard. There's a phenomenon that takes place within these 3 hexes, and down here I go through it, I say, okay, I got these 3 grassland hexes that all feature hazards. Rather than key up each hex individually, I'm going to group them into an area, capital A area. The area has shared characteristics I can use for all 3 hexes. I'll call it the golden quagmires. Gold because of the color of the tall pampas grasses that grow there and conceal the dangerous quagmire hidden beneath them. So basically it's like a whole kind of quicksandy, soupy area here that's really dangerous because you can't see it because of all the tall grasses that grow there that kind of camouflage and hide it. And so you have this region that's 3-mile hexes in this little triangle area. I have that. So now I have that area, right? And if I wanted to, I could leave that alone. Okay, there are 3 areas with this, and I could rely on, okay, wandering creatures, whatever. But I don't need to, now, even though I rolled up something for each one of them, now I know that there's this unifying, defining characteristic they all share. So now essentially these symbols kind of drop away, and now I have this region called the golden quagmires, right? And then if I'm writing up those 3 hexes, I can basically group together and say, B4, B5, B6, the golden quagmires, and this is what's going on. Then if I want to elucidate more on that, then I can take those individual hexes and I can dice for more contents if I want to. Or I can wait. Because the thing is, and I got to write in here somewhere, let some stuff be. There's going to be blanks. You're going to create blanks anyway, and you can let them be. But I would even say, even if I had a hazard, I know if I'm writing this for sale, if I'm going to sell it to somebody, I want to put it on itch or even give it away, it's incumbent on me to kind of fill in if there's something there, right? I want to fill it in. But I also think that if you're playing, leave some stuff out there. It's a hazard, but you don't know what it is yet. You don't need to determine it. You really don't need to determine it until the PCs show up. Until the PCs show up there, you don't need to know. I mean, maybe if they're, let's say in this example, they're in this town and they're like, hey, we want to go over here. What's over there? And maybe the locals would know. So maybe when they ask the question, then you got to go, okay, now I got to dice this out or figure it out because they're asking, and it would be obvious that these people know what this is. Okay, right, granted, right? I granted them. However, outside of that, until it comes up, until they get there, or until it comes up in some way, you don't have to know. So I think you can, if this is for your own use, you can relax some of that pressure to fill in absolutely everything. Leave some stuff kind of iffy. We don't know what it is because we don't, the cool thing I think with a lot of the sandbox plays, you don't know a lot of stuff that's going to pop up. You're mucking around and they end up in these mountains and something happens and you go, hey, these mountains may relate to this grasslands, or maybe there's some in this, there's some contamination in the swamp and it's leaked out into there somehow. Like, okay, but you didn't know that until the PCs got in here and you generated something in here and you generated some kind of contaminating, irradiating whatever. Then now this kind of makes sense to you when before it was like, I don't know what the hell it's going to be. You allow yourself those kinds of blanks because you'll get there eventually. You'll fill it in, or you could probably roll dice if you never do, but You don't need to do it all. Like leave these kind of like, I don't know what it is. You know, even if you didn't know, like you get to the village and they ask somebody what's over here, and you're thinking like, I got no idea. Maybe the villagers don't know either. Hey, they just do something. Hey man, we don't go across the river over there because people go across the river, go in there, don't come back. We don't know what it is. All we know is it's bad. Bam. And if the party decides to go there anyway, well then you got to come up with one. But you might they might think twice or thrice before going over there, and that gives you extra time to think about it. Or maybe they decide like, yeah, okay, we're gonna go. There's plenty of stuff in here, so we're gonna go somewhere else. In any case, the fact that it wasn't known almost becomes a feature. Like, ooh, the locals don't know what's causing it. Maybe that means we got to figure it out. And then maybe you end up saying, yeah, there's going to be some kind of adventure area in here because we got to explain what this is because we decided it is unnatural, that it's just so deadly that nobody ever comes out, yada, yada, yada. Great. We're going to figure that out in somewhere in one of these hexes is some kind of something that kind of explains what's going on. Absolutely cool. Or like, nope, they're going to go over here. Great. We don't need to bother. We don't need to bother with it. I think that's about it for this. Yeah, I put my hex key. I got this kind of simple key, but that's kind of it. You just start rolling down start building, work from the top down, build out your hexes and then go. And I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to keep building out this document with some more examples. And hopefully I'll get to a spot where I can post just one of these sub hexes that's kind of more or less keyed up using the sort of things that I'm talking about, grouping things together, starting kind of at the top, working down, and then only really looking for, okay, now that I've got all these groupings, is there something unique in this particular hex? If there is, yes. If not, it just means not yet, undiscovered. You could still roll for something when the party enters the hex. You can still have things developed there, but just, you can have those blank spots. And what I was mentioning that I didn't do is I could upgrade a couple of these settlements in here, at least one in here, and maybe there's a city and a town maybe in these two. Because right now I just have them as generic settlements. But I'm gonna keep finding stuff. I've already found some, obviously I found some typos, found some other things. So it's a work in progress. But I'm pretty happy with it. It's finally kind of getting down in a somewhat organized way. Some of the things that I've been talking about. Often again, I do kind of make some recommendations. I do kind of set things up. I'm using 3 mile hexes. I'm kind of changing things up a little bit, but that's that. And it is 3 till the end of the month on itch. So go get it. And hopefully take part in Hexcrawl25. Or even if you don't want to do Hexcrawl25, just make yourself a little Hexcrawl. If it's something you even want to dally with, you can put one of these together pretty darn quickly and just see how it feels, see how it sits with you. All right, and then the last thing to do, and then I can open up to kind of free range questions, organic, no gluten-free. I should probably give some other things more interesting names, but I did for this. It's called Of Wood and Wold, and basically what it is I finally got a hold of some stuff for Shadowdark, or just kind of the rules, and I took basically what I already done in Wilderness Adventures Simplified and Do Anything D6 Dungeons, and I tried to convert it to, or not Do Anything D6 Wilderness, sorry. Don't Do Anything D6 Dungeons I'm still working on. Wilderness, and then I basically turn it into this document, which I tried to make more or less compatible with Shadowdark, which meant mostly making it D20 centric. Now I know as I've looked into it, Daryl says, why not use a hex group that interlocks so there's no overlap if adjacent groups are appended? I'm not a hex genius. I suppose you could. I don't mind it. It just means that I can either, to go back where I guess I go back here, these are shared. How I end up putting them together, it doesn't really matter too much. It's just an artifact of how I put that together. There probably is ways I could shade it one way or another, but it works fine. I could probably take out some of these and have it more interlocky, But ultimately, it's only affecting these kind of borderland hexes, which you can do what you want with them. But yes, if I had thought more about it, I could have said, "Oh yeah." But that's just how I came about it, if that makes sense. Okay. So this is, do anything D6 Wilderness plus Wilderness Adventure Simplified, translated for Shadowdark, which for me meant mostly D20ifying things. So I go with the basic setup first, run down through there. I try to lean in on doing some things. Well, I do this already in Wilderness Adventure Simplified, where I kind of talk about normal, difficult, and extreme as far as difficulties, which is pretty similar to how Shadowdark does things. So Shadowdark actually leaves some things as D6, whereas I gave DC like D20 basically style checks. I keep the D6. I give you the D6 chance, but then I also give the D20, because I figure if you're using something like Shadowdark, might as well just a D20 system. Might as well use D20s, but you could use the D6. Use D6s if you want to. So then I have for all your terrain types, because Shadowdark has not a lot on wilderness adventuring. And I looked at that and I was like, wow, there's really not a lot here. Maybe there's, and I think I asked around and someone said, well, in the next version, next zine she puts out, there might be something, or there might be there. But I think, I have these kind of things already written. I just need to kind of do the conversion part, and hopefully it'll be something that may be new to some folks and say, oh, great. So the first part is pretty much the Wilderness Adventure Simplified Shadowrun, and then Shadowdark. I'd love to Shadowrun it too, Shadowdark, and then I go into the next phase, which is going into kind of the full D86 thing, where you're basically statting out the wilderness. Or actually, no, I'm sorry, I hadn't gotten that far yet. This really is over here, where we get into kind of diverse terrain types, where we have hazard dice and the attributes: turbidity, ruggedness, activity, peril, and scarcity. I go through what they mean. I give them values, and then I talk about how you can express them in shorthand and how you can put the numbers to work in Shadowdark. So converting them, because in the Do Anything D6 system, you would roll a number of D6s equal to that number, or you would need a number of successes equal to that number. But for Shadowdark, I converted to using more of a D20 thing. So these become modifiers to your D20, your checks in Shadowdark, or modifiers to your encounter, your check difficulty, because there are some preset check difficulties. So you do something like set see what the task is it easy, normal, hard, or extreme, and then modify those final DCs by the values. And then you can use, for time, it would be that, I think the ruggedness pretty much what would be incorporated into the time. Wandering creatures, have that turned in there, encounters. The one of the things that came up, and I was talking to Ian, who I don't know if he's still here or not, with the encounters in Shadowdark. So in my original system, I talk about using that peril, which is basically kind of a general, how dangerous is it here, that you can use it to modify your wandering creature checks, your encounters. But the encounters in Shadowdark don't work that way. There's a D100, I think it's a D100 kind of list. I don't know if it's exactly, and I think each one is 2, so it's really, I think, about 50, or I think 51 or 52, because I think 1 and 100 have specific encounters, and all the other counters are every 2. So I don't know, whatever that figures out to be, 51, 52 encounters, but they're not in any kind of order. So I would have said something like, well, hey, use your peril, and say, well, if I was, for example, an easy one would be if using the generic dungeon creature encounter and creature wandering creatures in something like BX, you could say, oh, okay, well, if it's got a peril of 4, instead of rolling on the first level dungeon table, I'm going to roll on the 4th level dungeon table, right? Easy peasy, done. In the wilderness, it's a bit more complicated because I use something else, but you could figure out, I think I could figure out pretty quickly, ways to moderate the table, or modulate the table rather, for what that peril roll is. So at the higher peril level, tends to get you more dangerous monsters. In Shadowdark, that kind of falls apart. It just doesn't work because the way the encounters are is maybe the 0-1 encounter is more deadly than the 100 encounter. I'm not even sure that's always true. I think I looked at a couple of them and it wasn't clear to me if this one was more dangerous than the other one, but then the whole rest of the table is kind of a broad mix. So I haven't figured out yet, other than writing a whole bunch of encounter tables that fix this particular issue or change it to make it a little bit more modulatable through math. I haven't figured out if there's a way to do it yet. So I think I end up just making some. Yeah, just make some broad things. Hey, increase the number of creatures, increase the complexity, or add a penalty to reaction checks. Because I'm not really sure. Other than that, I'm not exactly sure in Shadowdark how to do that, given the way they do their encounters. Because even rolling more than one, I think, doesn't always make a bunch of sense. But then that's it. This one is 22 pages. And as you can see, I think I've kind of got my style of typesetting that I've been enjoying, so I'm kind of using it. So if you are a Shadowdark person and you were looking for some more robust and just extensive rules for wilderness adventuring and hexcrawling, then give of Wood and Wold a look. It's $4.99. I was gonna go for $4, but drive through RPG, because it's currently, so it's right now it's on itch. It will be on drive-through any minute now. It could be on drive-through right now. I don't know. I mean, obviously, drive-through is a much bigger marketplace than itch overall. The processes, if you're not familiar with, processes for getting a product listed on drive-through take days. You put something in, and then you got to kind of sit on it and wait. Whereas with itch, you just put it in there and hit the go button, and you're live. So itch is a lot, I guess, easier in a way, though. I'm sure drive-through has their reasons for wanting to check it before just letting you hit the go button. But it means you're kind of sitting. So of Wood and Wold, I put it into drive-through and kind of popped it live. It hasn't gone live yet. The other thing with drive-through is if you want to do a deal of the day, and I think at some point, yeah, I'd like to do a deal of the day. The minimum, they've now said, this is a newer rule, that the minimum price that something has to be to do deal of the day is $4.99, as opposed to $4. So I was gonna have it at $4, and I thought I got it $4.99 for drive-through, so that I could do that. And then because drive-through has a thing where you can't have things priced differently on drive-through than other marketplaces, well, okay, I guess it's going to be $4.99 all around. So it's $4.99, but like I said, if you go to, and I said this at the front, but I've been doing this thing that I'm happy to continue doing, is if folks purchase copies, I unlock community copies. So there's a couple people bought some overnight. So now I think I had 2 or 3. I forget how many I put live. Now there's 1, and there's still 1. So if you go right now, you got 1 sitting there if you want it. If not, then it's $4.99, or you can kind of wait around. I feel like $4.99. I put like I said, this one similar to I mean, both of these, like the Joy of Hex Maps, this one, they're things that I'm kind of are in current development on, but I'm putting in a lot of time, I'm putting a lot of effort, and I feel like, yeah, I think it's worth a coffee. I think it's worth a latte or a cappuccino at Starbucks, or I don't know, Starbucks. I don't know what even they charge at Starbucks, because I never go to Starbucks anymore. But if I did, something like that, I think the amount of work and whatever I'm putting in, sure. This or a latte or a Happy Meal. Terrence says Shadowrun but Fantasy Earthdawn. Yeah, maybe. I was just watching a little bit of this video on, I guess, the whole history of the Dragon Riders of Pern, that I guess Anne McCaffrey had because I always thought of it as a fantasy novel, but I didn't read everything in the Pern stuff when I was a kid. But I guess it goes really sci-fi at some point. Wow, Terrence says Starbucks up to like $7 a drink. Well, in that case, yeah, you can if you can go to Starbucks and get yourself some kind of dolce latte dolce for $7 plus, you can drop $4.99 on this if you want to. Obviously, if it appeals to you, and of course, if you want to be a patron on the Patreon, which I always forget to talk about, thanks to my patrons for all their support. Patrons get it for free. I mean, on a perk of being a patron is getting access to it for free. I should say that. Brian asks, anybody got any resources, general tips for writing up random tables to flesh out city, town, districts? Should I write up some random events, unique buildings? I mean, interesting. I'm sure there have got to be some. I would say, Brian, I haven't looked at it yet, but cities. Was it cities without number? Is that the worlds without number? Is it for cities? Isn't that cities without number? Urban without number. Urban planning without number. Seems like that might be a good one. I really like a small table with some things. I think if you could come up with a couple of small tables, I think they can work. I don't know if you need individual unique buildings, because I guess it really depends on the size of your city and things, right? And I think I'd want to. I guess I always think about, well, what is it going to get me? So if I come up with 4 districts for this town or city, I guess, and I start filling them with unique buildings, like, what am I actually getting for that? Is it something that's actually going to come into play, or is it going to be, well, in case they go to the mercantile district, they're going to see the unique mercantile building, the market house or something. And it's like, well, yeah, I could do that. Or I could just wait to see if they ever go to the mercantile thing and then see where my heart takes me in that moment. Or if they decide to find out, we need to go to the market building or wherever the big marketplace is, then I can imagine it. But I guess it also depends, like all things, are you doing this for sale? In which case you're presenting a finished product over, or are you doing it for your game? If I'm doing it for my game, I really just want the broad outlines. And then in the moment, I'll figure it out, probably for me. If you're doing it and you're writing it up as part of a document that you're going to be handing over to somebody else, and you want to have each district have a unique building, that's fine. That's fine too. I think having each district have something unique, maybe the way I would look at it is like, well, it doesn't have to be a building, but maybe it's something unique. So, you have one of those, I don't know, there's always the seedy underworld area. So what is that unique? Is it a building? Is it the whole thing? They oftentimes will have some district, the Warrens or the whatever. And that will be, instead of it being a building that's unique, it's the mazy-like streets that are a half a foot underwater and smells like garbage. And okay, that's great. That's kind of the unique thing. Whereas the mercantile district, maybe you would have the market house and how all the roads in the mercantile district go to the market house that's in the central plaza that whatever. Okay, great. Right? You can't escape the market house kind of thing. So maybe like that, but it might be fun to think about, well, what makes it, kind of like, what makes this district a district? What makes this district its own kind of special place with its own special character that I can communicate to the party, and maybe it's gameable in some way, right? It's not just, it's the same, but it smells different, which is like, okay, it smells different, but doesn't really, like, what is it? Maybe you can really get lost in the Warrens, but in the mercantile district you can't, because they're making everything, they want to steer you towards the center of commerce, so everything kind of leads into the spot they want you to go, because that's kind of the thing. Whereas with maybe in the noble district, it's totally different. Everything is controlled, so there are these grand estates but very few streets, because they don't want people dilly-dallying. They want to control access, that kind of thing. Brian says, for their own jollies, practicing layout, want to try to make it look cool and sound fun. I tend towards like very small roll tables, like D4, and then each entry has like D4 qualities it could have. Yeah, because I mean, you chain together a couple of D4 or D6 tables, and you end up with a lot of choices, right? Just putting 2 D6 kind of things together, you get that D66, which is 36 possibilities. Add a third thing on the end of it, and you're up to whatever, 200 and something choices. So you can do a lot. And I think one of the things that, and I know I talked about this in a video not that long ago, is that a D4, D6 table is extremely manageable to write up. It's not, I see people, and it's great for a blog post, something like a D100 something or other. That's great. But it's daunting. If you look at that, you're like, well, I got to come up with 100. Like, no, you don't. Just come up with 4, come up with 6. It's fine if you're in a district and you roll the same thing twice, because districts tend to have commonalities. That's part of why they're grouped together in a district, because they have some things in common. And you lump them together and saying, here is Broadway. What makes it Broadway? Well, there are lots of theaters here. That's part of being in Broadway is all about. So if you roll up theater a bunch of times, That only makes sense because that's what Broadway's known for, is its theaters, that kind of thing. And so it almost becomes more of a feature than a bug that you're going to get more repeated results, kind of thing. But I'd obviously love to see, Brian, on the forums, if you throw in your work out there. It's an interesting idea. I don't tend to be one to really bother with that so much because I have not yet done a lot of urban crawl kind of things. Terrence says D53-ish fantasy cheeses and cured meats. Heck yeah, I could go with that, right? I don't tend to do a lot of urban crawls, and so I tend to be hand wavy about the towns because in my concept, medieval towns, everything. I mean, in my kind of medieval stuff that I sort of, everything's kind of toned down, so it's not like water deep. It's like these places are pretty darn. Even like the grand city of such and such is grand, relatively speaking, is not grand in like water deep or sigil or sigil, however they say you're supposed to pronounce it, like that. They're pretty small, so I don't get worried. I don't get too caught up in that. Plus, since in the games I've played, it's mostly going somewhere, getting something done, and then leaving. Unless I'm really gonna, we haven't really gotten to a part. I've not played a lot of games that have really explored, or I don't think I've maybe played in any games that have really explored spending extended time in the cities. And so then it's things you don't end up having to worry. I haven't had to worry about it as a player, and I haven't had to worry about it as a game master. Though it does seem fun if you could come up with a cool city with. I don't even have to be a cool city, just stuff to do in the city. Oh, Brian says it's for this weirdo giant. Oh, the fish. Oh yeah, the right. So Brian's posted on the forums about his. Well, he's calling it a giant fish monster hunting game idea, but it's pretty cool. The main port island is just kind of a big wreck of garbage. Yeah, see, Brian, I think in that case, the unique building, I think, could be something like, what is the giant piece of garbage or amalgamation of garbage that is this area? So, where the poorest people are could be on all this weird floating carcasses. Like everything's built as ramshackle thing on these floating carcasses. So that's kind of, it's not necessarily a unique building, but the actual thing it's built on is unique. Then maybe in the highest districts, you're on top of, I don't know, the bones of some, the bones of some giant megalodon or dinosaur or kraken. And so they're up in this other area. And so that being, and then you could kind of work in like, well, what if they're on these sort of ribs or whatever, the skull or whatever area of this kind of beast it is, then like maybe that talks about what they're made of. So that becomes a unique thing as opposed to a particular building. Yeah, cool. I like the tiny roll tables are good. I mean, look, tiny roll tables are my whole, going back to Joy of Hex Maps real quick. I mean, all these tables are tiny little roll tables. They're, every music is D6. D6, D6, D6s. I'm using D6s all around. And you can get some, you get some interesting things when you come down to it. It'll be fun to, and probably on the other channel, on the behind the screens channel, maybe tomorrow or something, I'll start working through some of this, getting these groupings together and kind of plotting out those groups. But you don't need a lot. You don't need a lot to get stuff. And I think ultimately hopefully your own imagination's kicking in. I think sometimes maybe I've fallen in this trap, or I know other folks do, where you kind of look at the table like it's going to give you your final result. Like, I'm just going to roll on this table and it's just going to give me the final thing where I can just have to do nothing but roll this table. And there are some tables that give you more detailed answers. But for me, I don't really want that. Sometimes I just need that. Sometimes it's nice to get the results that don't make sense, because then it forces you to think about, well, how did this, so where's one that I know that one showed up here in this map? How did this swamp end up in this whole area of desert and mountains, basically? Well, I can think about it. These are all elevated. This is sunken in somehow. Okay, got it. So that's kind of what I want. And you can do all of that with pretty small small tables, especially if you end up rolling on multiple tables, which I do here. You're rolling on a whole series of tables, so by the end of it, you're getting more results than the original 6. Oh, Terrence said a bunch of shipwrecks lashed to the top of a massive old lighthouse that looks like some kind of messed up tree. Ooh. Very cool. All right, folks. Well, I wanted to go through a few things. I went through a few things. I will put a link to, where was it? No. To Hexcrawl25. And I will put links, and even put links to my own stuff to both the Joy of Hex Maps, which for the month of January is free, and then of Wood Wold, which, like I said, because of drive-through, blame drive-through for the extra 99 cents. It's $4.99, but there are community copies. Are there still? Yep, still is one. So that's what I wanted to talk about. We'll be doing other stuff. This is kind of a stream, is sort of a gray area between what I wanted to end up doing here and what's going to be on the behind the screens, but I did want to talk about these kind of new things I put out, so I figured it was more fitting for the official channel. But look on the behind the screens channel, which you can, if you go to my channel page, you should see a pretty prominent link over there. I'll be doing more kind of dev stuff as we get this new year rocking and rolling. All right, folks. Well, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye now.